Today's session will be moderated by Steve Gatos, the executive editor at Variety, and please join me in welcoming now the founder of Participant Media, Jeff Skoll, and the CEO, Jim Berk.
Thank you. We're all the way in the end. Thanks, Rick. All the way. Jeff.
Here you go. Good to see you. Okay. Good afternoon. Toronto starts the right way. We have comfortable chairs, I have notes, and I don't have a hand mic, so I'm a happy kid. I wish I had an hour for each of my guests to chat, because once you start doing research on people like Jim and Jeff and other panelists, you start realizing the challenge is not to find some things to talk about, but finding ways to not talk about everything, such as the starting fact of you're sort of in your hometown, Jeff.
Absolutely.
I don't know if everybody knows that or not.
Yeah, I grew up in Toronto, and it was brought home. And first, thanks to Christoph for the introduction. But in his introduction, he mentioned we were doing the film JZ, which struck me as funny after, now thinking in Z versus Z for the last 20 years.
That's funny. Yeah, besides, all the great things in your background, and Jim, your background with the music industry, we could do a whole music panel. We won't, I promise you. But we'll start just by talking, one thing that hit me, because of your interest in social change, because of your interest in media, not simply for the sake of making movies and making money, but having these dual goals, that you have a social interest. Is Silicon Valley, it's becoming more and more a topic of what are the actual politics of Silicon Valley, or do they skew to the left or right? We have new ownership of the Washington Post. We have Zuckerberg in the news about Keystone. What do you think that from your time, is it a liberal or conservative town, or is that an impossible question?
It's a very good question. I think. From my standpoint, we try to look at issues as being bipartisan. We try to take the partisanship out of the issues so that we can get dialogues going. Earlier today, somebody asked a question about The Fifth Estate, which is the film that opened the festival last night. And it's really about secrets, government secrets, and the right of the public to know. It doesn't exactly answer your question about Silicon Valley. I think Silicon Valley probably, if you looked at the demographics, is probably leans left, just as California leans left. Yeah.
And it is young, and those two things would indicate that. But I think it'll be a topic that we could do an hour on. I won't. I was just curious if you had a strong feeling about where you came from in that way. But let's talk about the last 10 years. You're about to celebrate an anniversary next year with Participant Media. You've got, if my research is accurate, about 35 Oscar nominations and about 7 wins. Does that sound about right? Mm-hmm. Yeah, in addition to lots of other great successes and festival wins and all that sort of thing. But what, for you, Jim, and then you, Jeff, what have been the kind of biggest pleasures or surprises or challenges, what's come up in the 10 years that 10 years ago when you started, you look back and think maybe you were a bit unprepared, you could be surprised?
Well, maybe I should jump in a little, because Jim joined, it feels like Jim's been there forever.
You joined in 06 or 07?
But those first few years, I always had a dream as a kid to tell stories that would get people interested in the big issues of the world. And I wasn't quite sure how I was going to do that, but I figured I better figure out a way to make a living first so that I could try to tell these stories. And I became an entrepreneur, and one thing led to another. eBay happened. and all of a sudden I had more resources than I ever would have dreamed of. And it got me back to thinking of my dream as a kid to tell these stories. And in 2003, I went down to LA first to see if anybody had ever thought of setting up a company, an entertainment company that was strictly in the public interest, and what had happened, and also if there was any viability to do it in future. And so I met with everybody, actors, agents, directors, bankers, people on the street, and I would ask them what they thought of the idea, and people would roll their eyes. And there's one line that people kept saying that struck me. They said that the streets of Hollywood are littered with the corpses of people like you who think you're going to come to this town and make movies. And it was always the same line, word for word, and I thought it must be written on the town center or something.
It is.
But I would ask them what they were most proud of in their careers, and invariably they talked about a project that dealt with an issue that they cared about. And the issue could be anything. It could be foster care, it could be AIDS, it could be women's rights. But they felt that they were most proud of the work they had done on those films, and oftentimes they had taken a salary cut or they had given things up so that they could do those films. And I said, well, what if there was a company that made more of those kinds of films that you care about? Would you support it? And invariably people said yes. So in 2004, I moved down to LA and had no idea what I was doing, but had a good friend named Rick Hess at CAA who took me under his wing, and started Participant from there. It was kind of funny. Looking back on it now, it feels pretty naive to have gone down there and to have hoped to have achieved the kind of success we've had, not just with the things you mentioned, the awards and so on, but actually making a real difference in the big issues in the world. But a lot has happened in these 10 years, and it's been very exciting.
And Jim, and you're roughly about 6 years at seven at Participant. As a guy who worked in the LA public school system, that's correct, I hope.
At one point, yes.
Yes.
Very proudly.
You must be, you're not risk averse and you're not challenge averse. Were the challenges in doing what you're doing with Participant that may have thrown you or may have surprised you?
I'll tell you, having run some large international companies, billions of dollars of revenue, by far the hardest job ever was being a classroom teacher in terms of really what you want to accomplish. And most lessons you learn are not from your master's degrees in business and everything else. It's actually from, if you've ever been a teacher, being in the classroom. The interesting thing that's unique about this particular company is, if you think about a fire, and there are people who run away from the fire, and then there's a few brave souls who run right into the fire. And when I met Jeff for the first time in 2006, and you meet this man, and of course by nature he's mild-mannered and nice because he's Canadian, and and then he meets somebody who tends to move his hands a lot and talk a lot and everything else. And we're having this this lunch, first time we'd met, and he starts to talk about his vision for the company. And when people say things like, the world a better place, and and I want to create a global media company focused on the public interest, and we're going to have operations in every country, and yes, how many employees do you have? Well, there were, I think, 17 at the time. And I just started this, and we've had this initial success, but this is just the beginning. He talked nothing about where the company was, but where he wanted the company to be. In the first 5 minutes, you're like, okay, it's it's very sweet, but it's really not a sales job, but a bit of a presentation. And then about 10 minutes, you're like, God, this guy, is he real? This is serious? And then in 15 minutes, you're like, all right, I love you. I want to follow you. This is phenomenal. Somebody who actually is going to take all of their own capital and put it at risk in a perfect environment where it's a private company, and we can make decisions based on three main tenets: making high-quality films that are commercially viable, that are socially relevant. So to be able to speak to all the issues of the time, to be able to articulate stories in a very passionate way across a variety of genres, And the only frustration that I've had during this time, when you talk about challenges, is you go and we have this extraordinary team. We now have 220 employees and offices in two states, New York and Los Angeles, and production office with 40 people, and we have people in Doha and London and Chicago and other cities. But so we now have this much larger operation. And so you go to Jeff and you present, and he comes in, we do the strategy presentation, and this really just killer first-class team of heads of all these divisions. And they come in and they give this bold vision for what we're going to do with the company. And Jeff listens, and then you get an email about 2 in the morning, and he goes, well, I was thinking, that was all pretty good, but what could you do if you had another 100 million? What would you do if you wanted to try to expand faster? How would you do that? Come back to me and tell me how to, remember what the vision is, a global media company focused on the public interest. So how do we get there faster? So that type of environment is unique in a media business, or frankly any business. And so I think that's what's been the exciting both challenge and opportunity for us, because we're not a traditional company. We don't focus on a specific genre. We don't focus on a specific type of film. We don't focus on a specific structure. As you see from some of the friends who will come out, they all represent a different structure of how we approach the market. So we can be in a $1 million film that we developed from scratch with a new filmmaker, to an $80 million film where we came into a project that was far along in development.
There's so many different contact points for you both in doing what you're doing, because you're working with gigantic companies, big film companies like DreamWorks. You're working with real grassroots filmmakers. You're working with marketing. You're working with screenplay, acquisition, development. What parts of the machine do you find most fun and most daunting?
Yeah, well, when I started out, really the mission was to try to make a difference in the biggest issues in the world if we possibly could. And in the early days, we had a template of world issues that we were trying to tackle. And we started developing our own projects very early. We had people come to us with projects very early. And really what we want to do is facilitate the most change, the most tangible, real change that we possibly can. You asked what some of our early surprises were. Well, one of the things I did in my year of diligence before starting Participant was I went and I met all of the studio heads, and I talked to them about the mission of what we were trying to do as a company. And some of the studio heads just kind of looked at me funny. Others got it, and in particular, we had a good break in that Alan Horn, who was running Warner Brothers at the time, said, I completely understand what you're trying to do, and I want to help. And so our first 3 movies were Good Night and Good Luck, Syriana, and North Country, all done with Warner Brothers. And that put us on the map. That plus Murder Ball, the first documentary we had done, got 11 Academy Award nominations. That was our first year. And I think with that momentum and then An Inconvenient Truth coming the next year, I think that got us off to a really good start. And I'd hate to think what would have happened, because more normally you would come out with a string of films that wouldn't necessarily do too well, and then I'm not sure we'd be sitting here today.
With lamenting.
Right. But it does bring to one of the important lessons that I think that we learned early on is you've got to have a slate. You have to have, you can't put all of your eggs into 1 or 2 films, and that it's very important that it's like baseball in the sense that you're going to get a certain amount of time up bats, and if you're doing phenomenal, you're going to be at 400% or 350%, which means 5 or 6 times you're not going to have the outcome that you wanted. And we realized that that's why we needed to ramp up, and that led to our wanting to invest in Summit and get involved directly in distribution and developing our film fund with Imagination Abu Dhabi and now Doha Film Institute and development of Participant Pan America. And all of these things were designed to broaden the slate to make sure that we had enough product coming in, especially in a company that gets almost 3,000 submissions a year.
Wow. Was there a year, in addition to the year you just mentioned, Jeff, has there been a year of more kind of explosive growth or tackling more challenges? Because I'm reading what you're doing right now. You have Pivot that just launched,
Right.
which I'd love you to explain to people what that is and tell a little about it. But you also, I think today there was an announcement with Stacy's company, a new project launching there. And we also have the gentleman up here with Canada and the Pan America initiative is now, when was all this stuff kind of incubating? And
Yeah, I mean, you know, a lot of things have been happening, especially over the last couple of years. Jonathan King is with us here today, somewhere in the audience, and he runs our narrative film groups. And we've had a string of wonderful films in a row. Contagion, The Help, Lincoln, Best Exotic Marigold Hotel, and these films have done about $700 million of box office after we had a string of films that hadn't done quite as well. And then we're continuing with our latest slate of films. So on the film side, we've had a nice string of success, and all the while over the last several years, I had always thought getting into the TV business would be fairly easy. And from the early days, I thought we'd be, a TV company as well as a film company, as well as a digital company right off the bat. But TV turned out to be, a much harder nut to crack. But I'm pleased to say that we launched our new network called Pivot in the US on August 1st. It's in 42 million homes now to start. It's aimed at, it's like our films, it's all about social change and getting people involved.
And is TV tougher for you because of the nature of your company, or was there something about TV? Because I think of TV as a good business model as opposed to the film business, which to me is a tough nut to crack.
Right.
What was it about TV that was more daunting for you?
I think it's actually a pretty simple answer. In the movie world, if you want to get involved in a film and you have money, you get involved in the film. In the TV world, if you want to get involved and you have money, that doesn't cut it.
Okay.
And we actually had a small TV division for a couple of years where we had an executive who would go around town and pitch shows, and for 2 years absolutely nothing happened, and we realized in order for us to be successful we needed to control our own destiny. So we went out and we bought two existing entities, the Documentary Channel and Halogen, and put them together, rebranded it as Pivot. But this is only the start. I have a mantra.
Launched about a month ago.
It launched about a month ago, so it's early days. But I have a mantra, 10x in 10 years. I'd like to be 10 times further than we are now. So if we have 220 employees, I'd imagine 2,000 and plus. I'd like to be in every country in the world. I'd like to be tackling issues of concern in different geographies, in different languages, and to have multiple channels in multiple countries aimed at different demographics. So there's a lot to go.
It's interesting. I just mentioned one other thing that, as Jeff mentioned, the film industry is a fairly closed industry, as you know, and so there are barriers of entry if you want to come in. But with financing, if you're willing to fund your own content, you then just have that last barrier of finding a distributor, which is a daunting task, hence amazing places like this, Toronto, where you can come and have that opportunity to shine a light on your content and find a distributor. The television industry is different in the sense that it's also a closed industry, but it's a closed industry that isn't just with high walls. It has a roof and cement. It's protected by a small group of distributors that are at full capacity. So to come in, you just can't throw your content into the mix. You have to find a way to, in essence, literally take somebody else out and move into that, which is dramatic. And it replicates something that we did early on, which is when we looked at this business
out there
in the earliest days. Jeff and I were doing one of many strategic reviews to look at the playing field. We said, what are the barriers to distribution? So that's why we invested in Summit Entertainment, which has now been sold to Lionsgate. And that was designed to make sure that we have a direct pathway to distribution. Well, the same thing occurred in television. what is the direct pathway to distribution? And the answer is, unless you want to go around selling your wares, hoping for somebody else, then what you do is sounds like you want me to switch? Okay. 1, 2. 1, 2. Hello. 1, 2. I'm
See,
a
this
former teacher, so I'll have no problem speaking. Don't have to worry.
This is a barrier to
Gentleman in the
distribution.
back over there, Seventh row, you're not paying attention. 1, 2, there we go. So I think that what is really interesting about this particular moment for us is you have these 3 legs of the stool for this company. And the film business is fairly mature with 8 to 12 documentary and narrative films a year. The TV business that Jeff just spoke about is at its infancy, but we have a stronghold. We knew you have to have critical mass, so we've made that commitment thanks to Jeff. And then the third area is the digital business, which is TakePart.com, which sees about 5 million people a month and about 16 to 17 million page views. So that's where we get people to activate and do the social actions that Jeff spoke about. And this year we'll have so far year to date, we're at about 15.7 million social actions that have taken place through our social action campaigns and TakePart.com.
Is there a linkage there between Take Part and your activities in the documentary world? My first question actually is, the documentary world seems incredibly well suited to what you're trying to do. If you're trying to kind of jumpstart consciousness about something and activate an awareness, something like Inconvenient Truth in the Cove would seem to have succeeded dramatically. Is Take Part, is it connected to your documentary output, or is it, they're 2 different things? Can you explain that?
Every piece of content that participant makes that has participant's name on it, which includes all the original content with Pivot, which is over 365 hours in its first year, all of the documentaries, narrative films, and about 9,000 written articles that we create on Take Part, has its own individual action that you can take relative to that piece of content. Mm-hmm. So that's the activator. That was what drove it.
And how long has Take Part been around?
Take Part in its current guise has been around about 3 years. And there was always a predecessor. One of the challenges we've always had is, so now you've seen the film, mm-hmm. and you're geared up and you want to do something about it, how do you get connected? Take Part is the hub that gives you all kinds of information, helps you, sign up to volunteer, to donate money, to sign a petition, to get involved with an organization. And it's not just the website; it's also mobile. But it forms that hub for people that are trying to get involved and do social good. So it's been around in one way or another since the start, but we got really serious about it about 3 years ago.
Is there a mechanism or mechanisms to push this into the educational world?
Well, actually, we're doing it now. Every single film has either a discussion guide or curriculum. So if you take a film like Lincoln, and which we, with DreamWorks and Disney, created a curriculum that matched the DVD that then was distributed to every single middle school and senior high school in the United States. 38,000 of them went out. And so the idea being that the legacy of that film, the backdrop of that film will be, as you look back, that will be in the schools as a learning tool. And we speak to a couple 100,000 teachers monthly. Because as Jeff said, each one of those communities really drive.
Have you guys considered moving into the field of sound?
Yes. And of course, we're in the Glenn Gould Theater, and I understand this is a music and sound production facility.
Each one of those communities, so as Jeff said, we formed this community, and the community is with a consortium of NGOs, and we have about 480 NGOs representing about 55 million people that are part of our social action network. These are NGOs and nonprofits that have been involved in our campaigns around the films. But what's left behind is a community forum. So take a documentary, which did $7 million at the box office. It was the #1 specialty documentary of the year, Waiting for Superman, which looked at the American education system. A film like that had a legacy that over 700,000 people joined a community that we still talk to weekly. So those people are now getting supplemental materials, new content, and information about education and education-related activities. And when we have another film around that broad topic area, we then invite them into that conversation and port them over. So that's why we're interested when Jeff talks about, the next 10 years, as you hear, see what he does to me. I mean, it's always about, not where we are now, but where will we be in 5 years? Where will we be in 10 years? Where will we be in 20 years? And it's really the type of community that we have tens and millions of these folks that are part of these various communities around films and issues and contents that we're now cross-talking and cross-communicating with, connecting to actions that are relevant in other pieces of content, moving in between our television channels, our written content digitally, and our video content. We'll do about 700 videos online, and our films. So it's all this interconnected web.
It's fantastic. Jeff, you had said you've considered yourself a storyteller, aspired to be one. Who made you want to be a filmmaker? Can you think back? And I'll ask you the same thing, Jim.
Yeah. I have to say, growing up, one of the films that really influenced me a lot was Gandhi. I think I was 15 or 16 when it came out, and it struck me that here was a way to talk about an exemplary figure who had touched the world and spread that message to millions of people. Years later, coincidentally, I had just started Participant, and a friend of mine had just come back from Ramallah, where he was doing some social work, and he was very upset that the people he was working with were talking about violence as being the only answer to the Israeli occupation. And I said, well, what about Gandhi? What about nonviolent resistance? And it turned out that the movie Gandhi had never been dubbed into Arabic before. And I had just met Jake Eberts, a good Canadian, probably the greatest Canadian producer ever, who won 5 Best Pictures, and including Gandhi and Chariots of Fire and A River Runs Through It and Driving Miss Daisy. And I called Jake and said, Jake, is there a way we can get the rights to do this film in Arabic? And he said, absolutely. And so we got a hold of Sony Pictures, who gave us the opportunity. And we then did a dub with 113 Palestinian actors. And we got Ben Kingsley involved. And we then brought the film to the West Bank and Gaza and ran it for 3 years, reaching about 100,000 Palestinians, all who sat through the 3.5-hour movie, and then discussion groups afterwards. Anyway, Gandhi, Jake, and that whole,
Sir Dickey and all of them.
All of that really convinced me of the power of film.
Yeah, great film. And what about you, Jim? You remember your filmmaking roots?
Well, yeah, and I actually think it's and I would think there's probably some commonality with a lot of people in the film business, which it's really art-driven, because I believe it's part of an ability to speak a language that's and communicate emotion and higher-level thoughts in a way that is more intense. And whether it's through music, which were my early roots, or the written word, or the photographed word, whether it be video or still, you have an opportunity to try to communicate something in an emotional way that creates a commonality amongst a bunch of people sitting in a room, and they share an emotion. And that moment of that spark where you can experience that, where it can trigger memories and trigger emotions and thoughts and actually change behavior. It's something we're actually studying now. We're developing an index that's looking at a panel of 50,000 people across the country who consume content, and then what behavioral change occurs as a result of it. That's what fascinates the company as a whole, the idea that you can take art and you can actually inspire and compel and move people in a different way. And so for me, my roots are really driven in that artistic expression. Now, I don't play the trumpet anymore. I don't conduct anymore. Unfortunately, a doctor gone to waste. But what I do get to live through is these extraordinary storytellers, and their commitment and their emotions and their feelings. And it's just, it's a joy. It's a joy to be around them.
I have to warn you, though, if you've ever been involved in music, it never goes away, and somehow you have to be aware he's going to sneak a music division in.
I hope so. I hope so. But I would add one thing. You know, as part of the diligence that I did in the early days, I talked to a friend who's quite a brilliant psychologist, and I asked, what are some of the best ways to influence behavior? How can you make a difference to the way people think and act? And she said the combination of words and images and music has a really powerful effect on the human psyche. And that's why the film industry is so powerful. I mean, film as an industry is tiny. Worldwide, all in with TV and DVD and movies, all in, it's about a $100 billion industry. People will do $100 billion worth of transactions on eBay this year. That's one company in the tech sector. Yet, the effect of this industry, the effect of you guys, your stories, is so powerful. And I think in some ways, you know, the film and entertainment industry is as powerful an industry as there is on the planet.
It also has an incredible market share worldwide. The English language and Hollywood film, it's really an astounding number. When
But to Jeff's point, you know, the influence and impact is disproportionate relative
Yes.
to the business side of it. And that's what's so unique. There's a multiplier effect that's
Right.
unlike anything else. If you think about all the money expended to solve a certain problem, and what we're finding is a particular film can raise an issue into the consciousness and zeitgeist and spark changes at a level that could not have happened if you had taken the amount of money in that piece of content in that film and spent it on that issue. And that's what's so exciting about it. And it's done in a way where people aren't doing it to solve something and walk away, but they're actually changed and they care and are involved at a different level. You know, but one thing I do want to mention that Jeff touched on, because it's been the mantra from the start and from the first time we met, that it all comes down to storytelling. The social action is not the lead. It is not about that at all.
Let's bring up some folks who help you tell stories.
Great.
Where are our guests? They've been introduced, but we can go through that again. We have Stacy Snyder, DreamWorks. Hey. Anna DuVernay. Pablo Cruz. Matt Cowell. And Michael Barker from Sony. We'll slightly shift gears, but not too much. Michael, since we know each other so well and for so long, I'll throw the first tough question at you. Isn't the film business tough enough without trying to have a social action mechanism involved?
No, it's tough no matter what. But listening to Jeff and Jim talk, you know, especially in economic tough times, there's a lot of cynicism in the movie business, that to stay alive, you have to compromise in content and not pay so much attention to quality. And what they've proven is that paying attention to quality is what makes these films an evergreen. And for me, what they do in emphasizing quality
static or any breakup on it?
Hello?
is that
The NSA is coming in on this.
for me, the emphasis in quality and the way that how diverse their film activity is, from Lincoln all the way down to, you know, the smaller independent films, and how they are all equally important. To me, that's the long-term future of film culture. But the fact that they can make it into a financially profitable entity is just such an amazing thing. And the only other thing I want to say, a lot of it has to do with the two of them. You know, at the personality. I've worked with them 3 times, and there's no a large amount of ego invested, and they're such quality. Everyone at participants are really quality human beings. And I learned a serious lesson from them. The first 2 films we did with them, the films died. They did really poorly. And I was ready, as usual, to be attacked, blamed for it not to work out. But what happened is it bonded us even closer together. And then the 3rd one we did together was a success. And there were so many great life lessons to be learned from the way Jeff and Jim approach it.
And the success, because you didn't mention the titles.
No, from Chile.
He wasn't saying no to the title. He was saying no, the film.
No is the name of
Yes,
the movie.
yes,
So
yes.
I have to tell you one thing. Michael and his extraordinary partner Tom, 2 of them have quite a shop. And during the early days, we're coming in, and social action was new and foreign as a concept. And we kept saying, this is good. This will help for marketing and everything else. And you don't have to tell those 2 about any resources that you can add, you know, especially at no incremental cost to the film. And so we're at their offices in New York, and Michael and Tom share the same office, you know, and they're in together, and the 2 of them are in there, and they're like, oh, and we want your, you know, those people. And those people that do that stuff for you. And I really, Diane Wireman, the head of Docs, and I were like, what are you talking about? Who are these people that don't, like the do-gooders. Yeah, we want the do-gooder unit. Get the do-gooders out there. And from then on, internally now, whenever we're trying to figure out what, you know, how to challenge something, we always recall that. I want you to know. And we need the do-gooders. Go get the do-gooders.
Well, if there's any particular micro niche of audience, Michael and Tom over the years have handcrafted releases, and it's really interesting because it's not something that other people have done. Other people have kind of come in with money and bombed the marketplace, but they've taken great care with each picture. I think that's, you know, starting fresh with our whole panel here, it's kind of interesting to follow up on Michael's remarks. What we really have here is a panel in a setting that everybody can kind of take a deep breath and say fall has started. The summer of blockbusters has now officially ceased, and now we're into this time when we're engaged in pictures like Fifth Estate and 12 Years a Slave and Gravity and Prisoners and all the pictures that people are talking about. So I think everyone on the panel sort of knows the code for the challenges and the thrills of being in this business, which is a different one. Stacy, you came into Variety a few weeks ago in the midst of the summer that I think was slightly overblown, maybe even by Variety a little bit, as the summer of doom. Do you have any thoughts looking back on that business, and could you share a little bit of your thoughts about diversification of the studio slates?
Well, you know, what we talked about that day at Variety is I think, you know, the bigger studios who are chasing always the, you know, kind of bigger spectacle, global film, I think are catching up, as we all have had to this idea that, you know, the consumer is never more aware and never more armed than they are now. And so they're curating their choices. And so there are going to be some amazing, wonderful, big budget, you know, spectacle films, and others that in the old days might have gotten a default viewing audience, and now are easier to pass on. And so, you know, coming from the perspective of a smaller company, our attitude is always to curate our choices and to try to challenge ourselves to consider, is this really a value proposition for the consumer? Can we say that this is something that merits film treatment, that represents a quality experience? And that may occur at any budget level, but this idea that en masse and without differentiation is no more.
You know, it's interesting, just before the conversation shifted during the summer and people started noticing that a lot of really big films were not doing very well, Steven Spielberg and I think George Lucas were at a panel somewhere, and Steven warned that if you didn't have some mid-range films, if you didn't have some diversity in your slate, and everything was attempting to be a blockbuster, that it could turn into a bit of a mess. Was he correct? Do you think the summer proved him out?
Well, Steven is, if nothing else, the biggest fanboy that there is. Mm-hmm. You know, he loves movies. So I think what he was speaking to was his own sense of malaise and sameness and a lack of sometimes discretion in the selection process. So I don't think he was trying to impart some prophetic wisdom from on high. I think he was speaking as a film lover to say, oh guys, this is getting a little same. It's getting a little boring. Let's mix it up a little bit and pay more attention to diversity, to quality, to different sizes, genres, and films.
Well, Mark Twain said that we complain about the weather, but nobody does anything about it. Can anybody do anything about the number of films in the marketplace? Because that was another thing that was cited as a problem this summer. There were just too many films. Is there something that can be done about that, Stacey?
I think all the studios are talking about it.
They
It's
are.
hard,
They do.
you know, there's no secret cabin in the Catskills where people get together to make decisions. But I think they're looking to say, you know, boy, if we hadn't made this one, all of the profits on the hit would not have evaporated. And I think everyone is doing some serious soul searching.
Yeah. And talking about the filmmaking, that is a large part of what's being celebrated here. I'll start with Anna. Anna, can you kind of bring us up to date, because you're involved in so many projects. You have the documentary, short documentary on Venus that was this year?
Yeah, this year.
Yeah.
Not Venus the planet, Venus Williams.
Yes, yes, that's right. Sort of a planet in itself. And middle of nowhere. And what are you working on now?
I'm in a script polish on a film called Selma that will delve into a really amazing, dynamic 3 months in the life of Dr. Martin Luther King when he was fighting for voting rights for African Americans. And so it's a really, I think, brilliant way to kind of get into this epic life that's been a hard track for many filmmakers. There's not been a feature film on King attempted ever. Well, there have been some attempts, but nothing's come out. So that's exciting.
I don't know if this is the 19th time you've been asked this already this year, but you will get to 19, I'm sure, if you haven't. Butler, 12 Years a Slave, Fruitvale, Mandela, Black Nativity. Is it a good time for black filmmakers, for the African-American experience, and to be given a voice, given a chance to be seen?
Yeah, it's a good time for black filmmakers, but I think it's a better time for folks who are getting a glimpse at the African-American experience, and that goes beyond just the black filmmaker. I mean, thanks. Certainly the talent is there in the African-American filmmaking community. There's been I think, resistance to really explore, in-depth narratives, dramas that get into the nuance of the experience, whether it be historical or contemporary or in the future, which we rarely see. And so, it's a good time. Now, to keep it in perspective, we're talking about 6 films, so let's not get carried away.
Exactly.
But it's interesting, and it's exciting for me to see something small from a contemporary of mine, a lower budget independent filmmaker like Ryan Coogler do Fruitvale Station, next to Steve McQueen with 12 Years, next to even a Tyler Perry film, that all of those are valid expressions.
Yeah.
And I think really what a lot of us who advocate for black cinema and diverse cinema are trying to say is we just want balance, not all one thing.
Well, like I said, I think...
I want to tell you just one thing about Ava that is so extraordinary, is her films are so approachable. It might be a film in which the storyline is focused on an African-American family like Middle of Nowhere, but it's not an African-American film. It's a film about family and experience in it, and why it was so successful, why she was, got the accolades she did when it premiered at Sundance, and she won for Best Director, was all because of the fact that you can create a film about an experience with characters that maybe don't look like you, but yet you share the same issues, you share the same concerns and the same tension and drama. And that's when you talk about what Stacey said about these larger films in what the market was talking about, the Avas of the world is what makes the industry so very exciting. It's what makes Stacey smile with those people.
And I'd also, hearkening back to something Jim said earlier, that sometimes you can get leverage with a film on an issue that you can't buy any other way.
That's right.
And Middle of Nowhere dealt with prisons, and in particular, one of the issues we seized on was the high cost of communicating between families and prisoners. That had all been privatized, and families would be paying $200–300 a month for 15-minute phone conversations with their families, which was very unfair. And there were a coalition of groups working to change this. But with Middle of Nowhere acting as a catalyst, that's now been overturned. And just in the last couple of weeks, the FCC has reversed this and put a cap of 25 cents per minute on these charges. So one little film that Ava, miraculously created has made a difference.
Yeah, and that's part of that participant take part engine, you know what I mean? It really, I think it proves that there are riches and niches beyond, money. Like that's something, I know we're all driven by money, but that's something that is a life changer for a lot of people.
Do you think that something did change in the movie business that may have led to 12 years in Fruitvale and all these movies happening right now? Do you perceive anything changing in that way, or it's just a coincidence and a lucky, nice situation?
I don't know. I mean, I think it's every time a black film does well, it's an isolated incident. It's treated as an isolated incident. It doesn't serve for folks to think, oh, you know what? There's been precedence here. Let's do it again. No, it's kind of like every time it has to be redone. So it's a challenge for me to answer that question. I mean, I know that good work has been done. Good work has been pitched. There are great black filmmakers out there doing great work. I would have to say that I think for a couple of years there were films that had black themes but did not have black directors. So the interesting thing about this fall is that these major films are coming from an African-American gaze or a black gaze, and it's valid. It's important. That we be able to express ourselves. And so I think that some of those films that were black themed made by non-black filmmakers may have laid some business foundation for folks to feel more comfortable in exploring them.
As you said, and I think as I said in my introduction, everything here represents an alternative to the billions and billions of dollars that are put, because when you start to put all of the films we're talking about up against the budgets and the marketing budgets of the blockbusters, it's very interesting. It's inevitable to see a little bit of a David and Goliath thing going on with every single movie, whether it be Hispanic, black, documentary, indie, foreign language. It's all sort of the monolith versus this other kind of filmmaking. Pablo, can you tell us a little, because we didn't really get a chance to talk about Pan America and the initiatives that Participant is doing and that you're involved in. Could you kind of bring us up to date on that?
Okay.
Was no part of that? Was that an early part of this initiative, or is this an initiative that has come about after No?
Well, I think it's an influence of No, of course, and Chavez, which are the beginning of our relationship. Obviously, No, it's the spearhead, and
Chavez is the new film that is in production?
Chavez is now finished-ish, and releasing in March of next year. It's the life of Cesar Chavez, which probably for Canada means nothing, but it's a labor leader for Mexican Americans and Latin Americans in the U.S. It's an American-born union organizer. And so, we're making No, and I get a phone call from our Chilean partners, and they say, well, we're working with this. We got into talks with this incredible company called Participant, which we obviously knew from before. We share, in a way, the same perspective of being responsible for making films, because it's a microphone that allows you to speak about subjects that normally nobody has a chance to. So we think of making films in a very responsible way in that sense. So getting a phone call from Chile, and it was obviously merging these two worlds, Latin America, which obviously in filmmaking we are centuries behind, and the way we make deals, and we're surviving. We have a machete in our hand and we're chopping heads. So you get a phone call which says 2.5, 3.7. You're like, what? It makes no sense, but it makes sense. It makes sense because it makes that machete stronger, and it makes us capable of realizing the potential of our region. And for a long time, Latin America has always been a forgotten backyard. Now we are the future. So we're very proud of that, and we are very proud also to have partners like them who understand that, and who understand and are willing to sit on a table that the guy comes with a machete. So, and they know it.
Now, are the projects you're working on specifically for the Latin American marketplace, or are they also for the American Spanish language marketplace?
It's a big, I mean, I'm sorry to interrupt your question, but film is universal, so yeah, happens to be that we live there. And yes, of course, we also have to think about our audience. It's, millions of people, it's the largest audience with the same language in the planet. So, China, it's a huge market, but it has different languages and it's more complex. Here, it's all Spanish, and we are, it's very hard for us to talk to each other down there. So we also think that our films have to be universal. It's not just Latin America, but we are there. So there's a, we know who we are as well, and we call ourselves Latin American filmmakers as well. And it is an effort to bring capital, which is non-existent there, to be able to make more aggressive films that obviously are able to compete in the international marketplace. And the example is No. I mean, you saw it. The experience of Sony with No, it's a clear example, which is a film thought for the world, made by Latin American filmmakers and actors, and Mexicans being Chileans, and it worked. So it is an interesting tool and a source of resources to be able to make better films that are stronger, that you have a partner who's sitting in the Hollywood, powerful seat, who's telling you notes and giving you ideas and pushing for you to make better films. So it's a marriage made in heaven.
Do you think the American Spanish language market is underserved with movies?
Of course, and that's why we're here, sir.
Pardon?
And that's why we're here.
Yeah.
And, you have to realize that market is the fastest growing market in the United States. 28% of the box office is of that demographic, and it's growing. So the idea of having a relationship with master storytellers like Kanana and Fabiola and Dynamo, who are the three partners with us, is what really interested us. He talks about, the things that we're providing. What he's not telling you about is these are the three prominent, Spanish master storytellers, and the top writers, the top screenwriters want to work with them. So we have a saying internally that saving the world's a team sport. We realize that you don't go into another territory without partners that can really attract that talent and that credibility. It's why we hang around with DreamWorks. It's why we look to release films with Magnolia and Sony Classics. You've got to hang around with the best in the business and form a partnership.
And Matt, Magnolia, it's interesting that I saw a big studio movie about hijacking, quite good, Captain Phillips, and you had a picture, Magnolia, that was quite acclaimed, that maybe people haven't seen and know about, called Hijacking.
Yeah, we did a Danish film called The Hijacking, and it's excellent. I think it's a very similar story, and it was one of the best reviewed films of the year, actually, but it didn't quite connect.
And you also you do of your films at Magnolia, what percentage are foreign language films?
It varies completely from year to year. We do a few every year. It's not. I wouldn't say it's the majority of by any means, but we've done several this year.
Now, this is something that every time I come to New York, I either wind up sitting and chatting with you and your partner, or with Michael and Tom about. Tom Bernard is very bullish on the idea that the exhibition sector right now for specialty film, for foreign language film, is better than it has been in the past. I see it as a tough place for any kind of specialty film. Could you kind of give us your thoughts on the marketplace for foreign language cinema and specialty film?
Well, it's hard to talk about that sitting next to this guy, but the foreign language is so hard because it's sort of like everything has to go exactly right for a film to work. It has to get exactly the right reviews. It has to have exactly the right kind of festival path. It has to, and if any one of those things doesn't come together, I think a film kind of falls by the wayside. So it can work, and obviously there are successes all the time, but it is definitely a very difficult, challenging field.
But Magnolia seems very committed to it, as of course Sony Classics very committed to foreign language. What I'll ask you, and then Michael, maybe you jump in too. What causes your companies to remain committed to foreign language cinema? When I think the statistic, I did a piece about this about 20 years ago, and we went from something like 10% of the tickets sold in America were foreign language cinema to it's half of 1%. It's a small business. What keeps you in the foreign language cinema business?
Well, we don't really approach it like we're looking, to release foreign language films. It's very much a film by film, strategy for us. And, we will look at a film and see that it's foreign language and see, in a lot of ways that's a commercial handicap, but we'll see that, there are things that, can transcend that and then we think we can make work. So it's more kind of, working on films that we're passionate about that we think, are also commercially viable.
Michael?
It's very different. It's very different now than 20 years ago.
Is Michael's
Foreign language pictures, it's a good business to be in if you can be one of those handful of pictures, or maybe 5 to 10 pictures a year, that have that ability to cross over. Those tend to do better than successful pictures did before. The ones that are having a rougher time than ever are the smaller ones that can't get that traction. But I want to talk about, storytelling has a lot to do with which foreign language pictures actually work. And it's what Jeff and Jim have been talking about. The more I get into foreign language pictures, the more I realize, the more specific a movie gets into the culture. I take a picture like Separation. The more specific it gets into what's going on in that culture that's very foreign to us, the more interesting it is to us and the more exotic it is to us. Because it's so different. But at the same time, the overall storytelling and the story has to be kind of simple and clear and has to be something that the whole world understands, like a husband and wife going through a divorce, having issues with the parent and issues with the kids and lying to the kids. Somehow with that film was a big success because that story was something we could all relate to. But the reason it was a big success wasn't just that, but it was how foreign it was. It's not a bad thing to be foreign, it's you see something like No, it is so specific to the Chilean situation and what happened, it just blows your mind. It couldn't be made anywhere else. Yet, the resonance of that storytelling, of that political situation, is something we recognize here or within our own past.
I want to go back to something you alluded to, which was the 20 years ago. By the way, I wish I had a better memory and I could credit the person who said this to me about foreign language cinema, but they gave me the formula for success, which is exactly what you're saying. They said, you have to tell a universal story, but you cannot lose your home address. And so you have to have the specifics of the authenticity of the real story. Don't try to just make it a bland, it happened somewhere. It has to happen in a real place, but the story has to be relatable. So, but 20 years ago, Michael, did you and Tom find that the marketplace and perhaps some of the competition in the marketplace was skewing the numbers and making the economics of foreign language distribution more difficult than today?
No, foreign language distribution has always been difficult because television doesn't want to play it, because in the DVD arena, in the VOD arena, we created in 1987 the yellow subtitles, so you didn't have white on white. Up until then, that's all you had. So it's always been difficult. It always will be difficult. But I think because of the internet and the sophistication people now have about the history of movies, that it's a better time. It's a better time to find those movies that really cross over and cross into the culture.
Okay. And Matt, for Magnolia, is the acquisitions game a better game today than it was 5 years ago, or a harder game?
I think we're in a better place than we were 5 years ago, and acquisitions is always extremely competitive, and every film festival market, it's very much about kind of keeping, an eye on, being careful about what you spend, and things get pumped up in markets like this, and it continues to get more and more competitive. There's more and more competition all the time. But I think that Magnolia is in a better place, and we're looking to have a good festival here.
Can I disagree with you? I don't necessarily feel that way. I feel more companies that are either our size or bigger are getting more and more into production and so forth, and less interested in acquisitions. I find companies like Focus and Fox Searchlight and places like that less interested in acquisitions than they were before. Of course, Magnolia is formidable, but the fact of the matter is, again, it was always difficult. To be honest with you, I think it was so much more difficult 20 or 30 years ago, before DVD, before internet, when I started in the business and had the last Metro, it was theatrical and college bookings and nothing else. And that shows me how old I am. But the fact of the matter is, there's so many more opportunities. You've tried them now with the VOD and so forth. There's so many more opportunities now that I actually think we're in a better place.
One mysterious thing, that's why I say we could go into an hour on any one of these topics, but one topic that I think is incredibly important for specialty film is VOD, and trying to figure out the numbers in VOD, and for filmmakers to figure out if their movie's actually making any money. Because DVD has declined, it seems that specialty VOD, and VOD is the new world. Would anyone like to tackle, the idea of where VOD is today and where it will be in 5 years?
I just want to say one thing about that. The reason no one knows the numbers and no one wants to give out the numbers, the Barker theory is, because it's still so embryonic, there is no model that speaks to everything. The range is so all over the place that we can't make any assumptions yet. And
so it isn't that somebody's being secretive, it's that the system hasn't sorted itself out yet. Okay. Do you see, Stacy, you're nodding your head too, is there a sort of sorting out in the near future with VOD? Because it seems as DVD shrinks, VOD somebody has to pick up the slack, something has to pick up the slack.
Well, I think we're all believing that it will sort itself out, but I concur with
I'm sitting in front of my TV hitting $3.99 all the time, so as somebody was getting that money that makes films,
And I think it's heartening when you see certain films that can go out, VOD, that are wonderful films.
Yeah, the day and date thing seems to have worked on a movie like Arbitrage.
Loved it.
I believe the VOD number was as big as the theatrical number, and they were both made the movie, I think, perhaps profitable.
Yeah,
so.
it's heartening for all of us.
It's been kind of the Wild West. I think a lot of people have seen it as kind of a panacea to all the problems, with DVD kind of falling aside, and there's been a glut of product that's really been kind of poured in there and kind of flooded the marketplace a little bit. And I think there's kind of a correction, that's kind of been happening. I think people are realizing that it's not, an automatic, revenue source, and something we try to do is kind of, try to keep quality higher and kind of focus on cast as much as possible, and and it's been great for us. We find for things that kind of this kind of middle ground for stuff that's not a wide release and not a tiny art house platform release. There's a huge field that's underserved.
Is there a new reporting system needed to sort this out that doesn't exist right now? Anybody?
Eventually.
Eventually.
No one knows what's going on. So yeah, I think so. But I have a lot of thoughts, so I'll try to make it articulate. That's a challenge for me sometimes. But when you hear, as a filmmaker, when I hear Michael and others talk about this constriction in terms of acquisition, well, while I know that as filmmakers, especially independent filmmakers, there's a certain boldness that's coming from access to technology from folks of all kinds that haven't had it before. That's there's something.
Supply and demand.
Yeah, so these new pathways, VOD or pre-VOD, or the new self-distribution models, the crowdsourcing models, all of this is creating a new language, new architecture around what's traditionally been the summer of the blockbuster or what have you. So it's all these traditional models are collapsing, and it's a really exciting time to be working in the space.
Yeah, you wonder how you can extrapolate off of something like Louis C.K. doing direct to his fans, and
Steve, you hit upon something which is really important. It's just the glut of these number of movies that are out there, and how do we make them distinctive from each other. Today I opened the New York Times, and there are 25 movies opening today, and it's a real problem because the audience only has 24 hours a day in which to see something.
But I think when you come back around to a brand like Participant, bring it full circle, folks. Bringing it full circle. You know, with the company or with a brand that's it's one of the ways that I know my small film, which was on a weekend where there were 20 films, right, was able to be #1 specialty box office that weekend is because it was attached to something beyond just the film itself. We have to layer these in at this point. And so that's what they do so well.
and actually the interactivity that comes with having a story that is an important story that has a social connection to people. You don't have the $150 million marketing budget that a blockbuster has to just buy the world of TV and just buy everyone's mind share. But what you have is something that is on the front page. I mean, before I came here, I had the TV on in my hotel, and Mr. Snowden has now released yet another bit of information about how much encryption bypassing was going on and all of the companies, technology companies that were assisting. So Stacy, congratulations, you have a new marketing.
Right. Well, I was going to say, I feel somewhat fraudulent sitting up here with the hardworking independent filmmakers because I'm representing the billionaire Hollywood Jewish company on the panel. But representing the Hollywood Jewish billionaire, I can say that we too benefit from the reach and partnership of participants. So in the films that we've worked on together, from Lincoln to The Help to now The Fifth Estate, not only do we share common values and attitudes about film and the importance of film, but we look to the participant team to extend the publicity message of our film. So, you know, Stephen and Daniel benefited extraordinarily, and DreamWorks benefited extraordinarily last year, you know, because of our social outreach and connection to participants.
Well, you were the establishment until Fifth Estate opened, and now Mr. Obama isn't sure, so congratulations, you've joined the rebels.
There's one thing, you know, two quick observations. One, and it has to do with what Ava and, you know, was talking about. We have to recognize that there's a generational shift, which is the generation that said, I want to go to a room like this and watch on a big screen, I want to watch a film. And they still want to do that, which is the really good news. But they also don't care whether they see it on a tablet, an iPad. It doesn't matter. The size of screen doesn't matter. They're agnostic to the size of screen. So the technology is shifting, and the good news for the film business is painful as it maybe is during these transitions of losing the traditional DVD revenue, they're shifting too. The music industry didn't shift. I was at the Grammys at the time that Napster came about, and they said, no, we control the content. We'll just cross our arms.
That worked well.
And we see how that turned out. The audience just went around them. Yeah. The difference is the audience, the industry is recognizing. So as technology is shifting, the industry, even if they don't like it, even if it would have been better for them financially in the short term to say, no, only DVD. We won't stream. We won't do any of this stuff because the margins collapse on a pay-per-view versus. Instead, they're going along with it, which is why I think everybody's right. We don't know what it is, but it will shake itself out, and that model will continue. I like the good news for people like us is, you know, Stacy mentioned this is, I think the film we announced today is our 6th collaboration together. You know, it creates partnerships. Nobody's an independent. Nobody goes it alone anymore. The social networking needs. We are a better company because we do business with DreamWorks. We're a better company because we do business with these other entities. Mm-hmm. And I think that's what the current market has forced us to do, and that's a good outcome.
Well, as I said, I think the marketplace is getting an alternative to the monolithic movies, and that's a good thing. Why don't we open this up for discussion here? I hope there are some questions. If not, I'll keep dominating the discussion here. I saw a hand there, a gentleman with a cap.
Hello. Sound works. Thank you so much. First of all, I found this really inspiring, and I learned a lot about Participant, and it's really great. One thing I wanted to ask was about the line, you have to tell Universal's story, but you have to keep your home address. And as a Canadian screenwriter in trying to enter into this world where I feel like a foreigner and I don't feel like a foreigner. I wondered if you could comment on how Canadian stories can find a place outside of Canada, predominantly in the United States.
Any thoughts on Canadian cinema and prospects? There's a lot of Canadian, I'll say one thing from Variety, because I started a program at Variety about almost 20 years ago called 10 to Watch, and I'm in charge of directors, actors, screenwriters. The last few years, the Canadian talent on our Directors to Watch has been very exciting. Denis Villeneuve, who's having a great month right now. So I think from the perspective of Variety, we're paying attention to Canadian cinema in a very exciting way.
Yeah, I mean, it's always a challenge for Canadian filmmakers to reach out, and you know, it's funny how similar the U.S. and Canada are culturally, yet how difficult it is for a Canadian story to cross the border. I will say this, one of the first shows that we've put up on Pivot is Little Mosque on the Prairie. It's the first time it's been shown in the U.S. and we'll, you know, I'm hoping that'll pave the way for more Canadian content to come across the border.
The other thing is, and I say this in all seriousness, you have an extraordinary tax credit system here. It benefits filmmakers and the whole television point system. That it actually has people like us looking at in the television area in particular, going, wait a minute, we need to have Canadian writers, Canadian directors, because of the different level point system. It works really well in leveling the playing field and creating a platform for Canadian writers, Canadian directors, and Canadian actors. So it's really extraordinary.
It's a great thing. Another question? Did we have one here? Yep.
Hello, I have a question for Jeff. You said that you came to Los Angeles and you said you start meeting all the executives. It sounds kind of too good even for American movie with happy end. Can you say a little bit more about this? And I understand you already came with money behind. Am I correct? Can you say a little bit more about your beginning?
A little bit more about how you started it in Hollywood with the participant media.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it certainly. You know, I met with everybody and really tried to learn and really tried to understand. You know, I came from the world of technology, and being in the film business was something I'd never really thought about. So. Meeting with the executives was you know, it was a small percentage of the kind of meetings that I had, and you know, not all of them got it. I mean,
was the first suggestion that you just give them the money and then stay out of the creative process?
Oh, absolutely. I
suspected that.
There were no lack of offers to put money into movies that had absolutely no social relevance, and you know, write a check and show up to the premiere. We're lucky though that in the industry there are people like Stacy. Who gets it, and there are people like Michael and Tom who've been around a long time and get it, and the Alan Horns who get it. And in the early days, Sherry Lansing was just retiring when I was starting. She was running Paramount, but she was just retiring when I was starting Participant. But she was a mentor as well. So
Jeff, I would imagine also that the creative community must have automatically embraced you because you were talking about telling a lot of stories they wanted to tell.
Steve, that's exactly right.
So you had allies. How quickly did George Clooney and your company start working together?
Right away. I think if you're doing something that somebody really wants to do, they're more inclined to do it. You know, Good Night and Good Luck was actually an interesting story. It had been something that George had been trying to put together for years, but it was a black and white period drama. It was a kind of an awkward script. But George was so willing to do it that he was ready to mortgage his house. He took $1 to act, write, and direct the film. I mean, the sacrifices that the artists make for these films that they care about are truly profound. And I'm sure that that's no secret that, you know, all of you have your passion projects and you're sacrificing to make them happen.
Great, thank you. Let's see. I'll ask you. Yes, go ahead. We'll go back so the front doesn't dominate here.
Wait, me?
Go ahead,
No.
yes, please.
Oh, okay. Jeff or Jim, Jim said that being a non-traditional company, I was wondering, how do you submit a project to you guys? Because it's not an easy thing to do. I've tried.
Okay, how to submit projects.
Okay, here's the good news. Jonathan, right there in the blue, get him right afterwards, the head of feature film. And Diane, right behind, is the head of documentaries.
So there must always be a sacrifice at every one of these shows.
Jonathan, run. No, but seriously, there's actually a submission process that's outlined on the website. We, like all production companies, do look at stuff that usually has to be represented, and that's where the challenge is, and that has to do with some legal issues and everything. Yeah. That's a whole different panel.
But that's standard. Every
process.
company, they do not want unsolicited stuff. They want it to come through an agency or a lawyer.
It's hard.
Yeah.
It's a challenge.
It's not hard to just get an attorney to send in a letter that acknowledges the legality of the submission, so that the studios aren't put in a position where they can be challenged on copying or other infringements. So it's not that hard.
I guess I was too non-traditional.
Yeah. Gotta have an attorney. Lady in the back with the orange. Wearing orange, I should say. She's not holding an orange.
Hello. You talk about partnering with other people who get it. But I think sometimes, you know, the vision seen in independent cinema can appear to be at odds with the values of sort of commercial interests. And so can you talk about navigating that in your projects, like the actual value of valuing certain social issues? And do you feel as though you have to compromise for commercial purposes?
Okay, and maybe I can tailor that question a little bit. Has it put a crimp in what you're trying to do? Is someone, I think the idea is that someone in the food chain says that's too touchy, or that's a subject we don't want to deal with, or we don't agree with. Has that become an obstacle at any point?
We've talked about this a lot, and I know, and Michael and Tom, actually everybody across. The interesting thing is we're the company that will push very hard that you not lead with the social issue. We don't believe that's the entryway into the conversation. We'll communicate to those people in a way that's stylistic to them and customized to them in our social action network. But the fact is, and Jeff said this, and we've talked about this, it starts with a story, a good story well told. So it's all about the story first. There was a film that we had that actually was grabbed into turning, that came out recently that didn't have the box office we had hoped, Promised Land. And it covered fracking. And we worked very hard not to have it be labeled that type of film, because that was just a vehicle in which a story was being told about small towns and what they face. And that was a case where we were wrestling hard for it not to be looked at as an issue film, actually. I mean, Stacy and the marketing folks would probably...
I think that our goal, which is shared by participant, is to engage as many people in the conversation as possible when you're doing a movie that is socially conscious, you know, has a social consciousness. And so asking ourselves, will this be commercial, will people see it, isn't a sellout. It's not perceived to us as at least I can speak for myself, as a cop-out. It is, can we really mobilize people because the ideas inherent to the film are compelling and the story is compelling, and we're now hip to the power that participant can add and fuel to our movies, but many of them that were made, you know, that I've made in my career, whether it's Brokeback Mountain or Philadelphia or Erin Brockovich, were designed as movies that could capture conversation and generate conversation, and then ended up, thankfully, to have a social element. So I guess what I'm saying is we don't see the reach for commerciality as a compromise. We see it as a way of catalyzing the conversation.
Thank you. How about back in here somewhere? There's a hand up right there.
Hey, thank you all. This has been great so far. A question that I have, when you're dramatizing a true story, you look at something like Moneyball, and they made Art Howe sort of into a negative guy, and he was unhappy about that. You have players that were on the Athletics that were key to their success that are left out of the equation. So what do you do when you're navigating the real lives of real people and putting it onto a film?
Well,
what's the morality of changing their stories?
I'm going to suggest that was a panel question for an entire panel discussion. But if somebody wants to tackle the thorniness of true story rights, I think that's a big question. Am I right?
Yeah, we're right in it right now with the Fifth Estate, and you know what drives us is to remember that it is narrative filmmaking, not documentary, and the reason that we can capture and generate conversation globally is that there is an entertainment value to it. Having said that, there's a higher responsibility to fairness, not absolute factual documentary verification, but fairness. And speaking on behalf of the filmmakers, for example, on the Fifth Estate, I know that every conversation every morning on set was about the different perspectives between Julian Assange and Daniel Berk Schmidt, and remembering and recalling that he is alive, that his fate is being played out now, and to that end we had a greater responsibility for fairness, which fortunately dovetailed to a driving passion of the filmmakers, which was to put the responsibility for deciding the truth of this issue squarely upon the shoulders of the audience. And the film in kind of every frame challenges the audience to say, what do you think? Yeah. What do you do about secrets? What do you do about transparency and privacy? So this higher responsibility ended up informing the nature of the film itself.
You know, I just watched the David Mamet HBO thing on Phil Spector, and I thought it was interesting because I think the true story moniker is almost like a marketing piece by itself, but David Mamet was very specific at the start of the movie. It said, this is not a true story. This is inspired by events, and so you're not watching a documentary. Do we have time for one or two more questions? Very close. Well, that gentleman there has been very patient.
Hi, hello. Let me go back to foreign language films. As I understand, you are a distributor. I mean, Sony and Magnolia, of course. You're DreamWorks, so it's probably non-relevant. But do you have a record with? I'm an Israeli filmmaker. Do you have a record with producing, financing a foreign language film? And can you talk maybe? I mean, is it a challenge? Can you? Is it a challenge? Is it? Sorry, it's not my native language. Is it something would you do? Is it something would you deal with?
Would participate in foreign language production?
My dream is that participant is producing content in every language, in every part of the world. We happen to start out in the US and in English because that's what I'm most familiar with. But we've done a couple of foreign language films to date. We did a film called Circumstance, which was in Farsi, and we did No in Spanish. And we're going to learn. And I believe that in 10 years from now, the majority of our content will be in other languages other than English, and in other countries other than the United States. As it happens right now, English is really the world's kind of common denominator language, so it is a good place to start. And by the way, there are so many wonderful films that come out of Israel and storylines, and that then get translated into English and go on to be quite successful.
I want to say one quick thing. You see, he does this. He does this all the time. He goes to a public forum, and then he tells you about something he wants to do 10 years from now, and he's going to put it in every country. And then we go off the stage, and he says to myself and the other executives, he goes, "This is great. You heard we said we were going to do it, so we have to do it. So come up with a plan."
Did you want to say
now
something?
I just found out we're going to be in every single country in the world in 10 years. So there will be an employee submission site that we will be putting up.
Michael?
And you know what? If he says it, we will.
That is what is so impressive about Jeff Skoll. Let me tell you something. This guy is not about winning the weekend. This guy is thinking 10 years ahead. This is the kind of thinking you need for a quality brand. I've been the beneficiary of it at Sony, because when I first came to Sony, they said it's a quality brand, but take your time. We want you to be here 10 years from now. And to me, it's a mindset that's very different from just winning the weekend. And so
thank you.
He's so impressive.
Thank you. I want to thank you all for ending on a positive note about foreign language cinema, which is my own personal passion. And also, you said something about your childhood dreams. I wanted to thank you for making my childhood dream come true. I now have Robert the Robot thanks to eBay, which my parents were too cheap to buy me when it came out. So thank you. Okay, thanks.
Thank you. Thanks, Steve. Thank you for taking your time.
Sure, no.
The art of moderation.
Thank you so much to our panelists. Our happy hour is now starting. Stick around. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.